everyone, and welcome to another Trial Site interview. I'm Brandon, your host, and today we'll be talking to Dr. David Wiseman. Dr. Wiseman is a former researcher at Johnson & Johnson, has experience in adhesions, pelvic, and abdominal pain. He monitored the hearings on Capitol Hill last week titled Assessing America's Vaccine Safety Systems. Dr. Wiseman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
The three-person panel was made up of Dr. Peter Marks, the director from the FDA, Dr. Daniel Jernigan, the director of the CDC, and Commander George Reed Grimes, director of the Division in Injury Compensation Programs. So let's start with some of the questions that they were asked. So Representative Garcia from California asked Dr. Marks, quote, do the COVID vaccines cause turbo cancers? And we're going to take a listen to this clip.
Hey, Dr. Marks, can you clarify once again for the American people, do the COVID vaccines cause turbo cancers?
I'm a hematologist oncologist that's board certified. I don't know what a turbo cancer is. It was a term that was used first in a paper in mouse experiments describing an inflammatory response. We have not detected any increase in cancers with the COVID-19 vaccines.
Thank you, and I thank you for correcting the record.
Let's go back through that. Dr. Wiseman, how did you think that exchange went?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. We're starting off with this. This is probably one of the most emotional exchanges, and actually, I think you're going to run into the next part of the clip in a little bit as well. That was in this hearing, and I think it's important to just frame it a little bit before we address the cancer question. In that Dr. Wenstrup, who is the chairman of the committee, really introduced the hearing, I think, very well, and said, "Listen, we've got a problem with mistrust in the public health institutions, and we need to get to the bottom of this because this is for whatever reason people aren't taking COVID-19 vaccines, but that's spilling over to other types of vaccinations." And he said, this is certainly not a so-called anti-vax hearing. It's a pejorative term, he said, and I agree with him, that shouldn't really be used. He said, but we need to get to the bottom of these things. And people will label this as an anti-vax hearing, and it's absolutely not. And I think he framed it that you introduced the hearing in a very appropriate way to try and say, listen, we've got tough questions to ask and answer. And let's try and do this in the most, cool-headed manner that we can. And so, with that, this question that came up, somewhat into the hearing wasn't the first one off the bat. But the representative asked Dr. Marks, who is basically the leading vaccine scientist at J&J. He directly reports to the head of the FDA about this term turbo cancers, and that term has certainly been used in social media. As Dr. Marks said in his response a moment ago, it's not a sort of a term, a well-used term in the medical literature. It's a term that's sort of mostly popped up recently, and it refers to anecdotes of aggressive or fast-moving cancers in situations that have been unexpected, according to anecdotes. And so Dr. Marks's response was quite, irritated, and he said he's an oncologist and so on and so forth. He doesn't know what that is, and that was the sort of, I say, emotional part of his answer. But the substantive part of his answer, which is what I think should be focused on, is what he said, something like, there's been no reports of cancers or no increase of cancers or something of that kind to do with the COVID vaccines. And that part is a part which I really think needs to be questioned. And if I can just share my screen very quickly, and I want to show you here, let's just address this cancer question and try and do it in the cool manner that I hope the committee would be doing, as per the tone set by the chairman. appropriately. And so the first thing I'm going to show you is this is the package insert or an excerpt from the package insert from the Comirnaty that said that it was not had not been evaluated for carcinogenicity or genotoxicity or male fertility for that matter, and the reason for that is given in this excerpt below from the European document, and FDA has similar wording in other documents, that they didn't do these sorts of studies because these things are not expected to have genotoxic potential. That means that a toxic effect on DNA. And so the studies were not done to determine or not determine whether this might be the case. And then on the next slide, it gives further, and this is an FDA Pfizer document, that these types of studies are not generally done, and they quote a WHO guideline from 2005. And so it's important to look at what that guideline says, and this is what the guideline says. And indeed, the guideline does say that these types of studies are not normally needed for vaccine formulations. Well, this was all written at the time before mRNA vaccines and so on, and they had this in mind for conventional types of vaccines. And if you look at the red words here, carcinogenicity studies are not required for vaccine antigens, okay? And so it's important to note that these vaccines do not contain antigens in the sense that this is the spike protein that is, being inoculated into someone for someone to develop an immune response. These are mRNA or DNA in the case of the Janssen or the AstraZeneca, and those are genetic instructions that cause the body to produce spike protein. So the guideline was not the way the guideline they quoted as being the reason why they didn't need to do those studies was this paragraph, but the paragraph clearly does not apply. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to address more specifically the question about the comment that Dr. Marks made about cancer reports and so on. This is a brief analysis that I did a few months ago, looking at the VAERS reports, and we'll talk about VAERS, I'm sure, in a moment. But just looking at the reports, you can analyze the data in different ways. But if you look at COVID-19 vaccines from 2021, there were 3,900 reports of cancers. And all other vaccines for all other years combined from 1990, there were 2,100. So you just divide the number of years and so on, you can see that the number of reports per year is 10, 15 times more, with COVID vaccines than all other vaccines prior to that. So to say there's no signal is not accurate. It doesn't mean that this is causative. We know that VAERS cannot determine causation, but this has to be discussed, and that's the point. Further to that, on this slide here, this is an analysis from CDC. This is CDC's own analysis. I haven't done any analysis here. Okay, I've just put highlights there, but the yellow highlight is actually original to the CDC document, which was a FOIA disclosure. And this is using a certain type of a signal analysis of the VAERS system. And the key point is this in this column in the red box, if the number there is bigger than 2, that's called a signal. Along with the fact that if the corresponding number in this column is bigger than 4, that's considered to be a signal. A signal does not mean that the vaccine caused these things, but it means that it's something that needs to be looked at. And you can see that I've pulled out of the many hundreds of signals, the 10 or 15, 10 or 12, whatever the number is here, of signals for cancer-related codes. Okay, and so it is not accurate. It is partial information at best for Dr. Marks to sort of give the comment that he did. They need to say, yes, there were signals and we investigated them, and this is the result of our investigation. But to dismiss it entirely, I think is a huge problem. And I think this gets at the heart of the issue that everyone agrees with, Democrats and Republicans. I think that there's a complete loss of trust in the public health institutions, and this is one of the reasons why, because there have been signals that have not been discussed. If they've been investigated appropriately and with correct scientific rigor, they conclude that it is causative, it's not causative, that's one thing. But to say nothing is a problem, and this gets at the heart of the problem. And we can give other examples of this type of thing. So that's my answer. Oh, sorry. One other aspect to that is a paper was just a preprint just came out in the last couple of weeks from Carlos Alegria and Yuri Nunes, who analyzed the UK data, or England and Wales data, for cancer-associated deaths. Again, lots of challenges with the databases. We understand that. We understand the causative issues, but at least as a preliminary look requiring further investigation, what they're showing in this left-hand graph is that the overall trends of cancer-related deaths since 2020 have been trending slightly down, but then they started to jump up in 2020, 21, 22, and that follows whether we look at all overall numbers on the left or male-female numbers on the right, and there could be lots of reasons for this. But are they vaccine-related? Are they COVID-related? Are they completely unrelated? We don't know. But the fact is that we've got these what are highly statistical, significant increases of some kind, means that this needs to be looked at. And again, that is something that unless this is tackled head on in a cool, calm, collected manner, without rhetoric, without emotion, you're only going to compound the lack of trust in public institutions.
And let's move on to Rep. Mike Cloud from Texas. Asked a few questions regarding transmission.
Right.
I do want to play one clip
yes,
of this
questions. It's simple, yes or no. Does the COVID-19 vaccine prevent the disease from you receiving the disease? Does it?
You can't have a yes or no answer to that question, because it will reduce your risk of serious outcomes such as death.
Right. I'm not debating whether or not it helps people. It mitigates some of the. But what the people
I care
heard,
if I'm alive or dead, so I think they do a very good job of preventing death and hospitalization. They may not prevent
I agree.
Infection.
The mantra at the time was to stop the spread, and so we were understood that we either did not receive it or could not transmit it when it was released. Could you speak to that, Dr. Jernigan? Can you receive it or can you transmit it after receiving the COVID-19 vaccines?
Yeah, I think having worked at CDC for 30 years and seen the benefits of vaccine, we have to make the best recommendation.
Can you transmit it or can you receive it after receiving the COVID-19 vaccine?
We need to make the best recommendations that we have.
That's a yes or no question. It's very simple. Commander Grimes, can you receive?
I think we make the best recommendations for the public as we
Can you still get COVID after getting the COVID-19 vaccine?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
That's correct.
Does it prevent you from transmitting it?
Although there's data that shows that earlier in the pandemic there was some reduction in transmission. The data on that are very challenging to pin down, but it does not absolutely prevent transmission. So
it does not prevent transmission. Thank you very much.
So it took them quite a while to get to that answer he was looking for.
It took us about 3 years to get to that answer, actually. It might have taken a couple of minutes in that clip that you just showed, but it's taken about 3 years to get to that point. And I think that was stunning, frankly, because as you know, and as the representative pointed out, the mantra has been, it's going to prevent transmission and so on and so forth. And that was underlying in huge part the federal mandates and employer mandates and so on and so forth. And finally, it came out that they do not reduce transmission. And that's hugely important. And again, it speaks to the comment that Dr. Wenstrup in opening the meeting, is that we've really got to get to these fundamental questions and do it in a calm, collected manner. Now, what is not appreciated, what is widely stated, and again, can I share the screen?
Sure.
Let me just do that. Okay. So the question of transmission has sort of got diluted, and let me show you a couple of slides here. So there was a citizen petition about a year ago from a group called the Coalition Advocating for Adequately Labeled Medicines, and Dr. Linda Wustiller was one of the main people in that group, and they were petitioning the FDA to include labeling, a language in the labeling that says, this is not a license for transmission, hasn't been proven to reduce transmission, and so on. And the FDA, pushed back on that for a number of reasons, which we don't need to go into the details of that. But what's important here is the FDA. These are now FDA's words in their response here, that the vaccines are not licensed or authorized to prevent infection, for prevention of infection with the SARS-CoV virus or preventing transmission, and nor were the clinical trials supporting the approvals and authorizations designed to assess whether vaccines prevent infection or transmission of the virus. So that's been the mantra, and at least I don't know, it opposes the mantra that's saying, use this and it will prevent infection, because clearly they were never designed to do that according to the FDA. But let's look at that a bit more closely. And this is a fascinating quotation from an FDA advisory meeting that took place in October 2020. So this was about a month and a half or so before the Pfizer and the Moderna were actually authorized. And this is introducing the idea of an emergency use authorization. And Dr. Doran Fink, who was the sort of deputy, as it were, to Dr. Marks at the time, he now works for Moderna, I believe. But these are two quotes that he's saying in the top quote here, that most of the trials also include endpoints related to more severe COVID disease and also infection, whether or not asymptomatic. So that speaks to the idea of asymptomatic infection, that you can acquire it somehow or other in the process called transmission. It's not exactly measuring transmission; it's measuring whether you acquire asymptomatic infection or symptomatic infection. And those studies included those endpoints, and not only that, that these secondary endpoints would be described in the vaccine labeling. Okay, so it wasn't the primary purpose of the studies that were done, but it was a secondary purpose, and the results of those inquiries would be reflected in the vaccine labeling. Okay, so that was I hadn't realized that until not that long ago, until I read this or heard this, and when I checked it out, and on this slide, and you look at the papers that Pfizer and Moderna published in the New England Journal of Medicine, Thomas, first author in the Pfizer, Barden, the first author in the Moderna paper, and you look at the paper as well as the protocol, the attached protocols, you see that yes, they agree that they were doing something to evaluate either transmission or more specifically here, the acquisition of asymptomatic infection. Okay, that was ongoing, and that was part of the study. That was either a secondary or a tertiary endpoint. Okay, and they say that the evaluation in the Pfizer paper is ongoing in this trial. The Moderna paper, Barden, says something. Evaluation of the incidence of asymptomatic or subclinical infection is underway to assess whether vaccination affects infectiousness. Not quite the same as transmission, but close. Let's say. Okay, so they were trying to collect these sorts of data 3 years ago plus. What happened to those data? Did you see any data from Pfizer or Moderna? No, you didn't. So clearly the data, some data were available. It either was no good or it didn't work, or I don't know. But where are these data? What do they actually say? So that exchange that you just showed a moment ago is extremely important. And again, it speaks to the trust in the public health institutions. We were told one thing, and now they've admitted another thing, and this is the backup information that we've got from the studies. This is going to be corrected. They can't keep doing this. They have to come clean, and sometimes the results are not what you want them to be, and we understand that. We understand in a pandemic situation that not everything is as black and white as you'd like it to be. But you have to tell the public the truth and not try and oversimplify it to the point where it becomes an untruth.
Let's talk about the questioning from Rep. Debbie Lasko from Arizona. She brought up VAERS.
Right.
She mentioned, quote, a lot of constituents have reached out concerning the amounts of deaths listed in VAERS, to which Dr. Marks replied back, quote, we probably have not done a good job, unquote, accurately informing Americans about the confirmed COVID-19 vaccine deaths and injuries. And that led into a follow-up from Rep. Lasko, who mentioned a former constituent in Arizona who developed paralysis after being forced to get the vaccine. And she even mentions then a story about a New York man who suffered from HLH after receiving the vaccine and eventually died, to which there have been no reply from the federal government really to either case. And she mentions at the end, we're going on 3 years. We have not heard back from the government on this. To Dr. Marks. What was your take on that exchange?
Yeah, and I thought that was a very even-headed exchange, actually, on both sides of the question and answer. But what is important? There's a couple of different aspects to that. So first of all, deaths. So overall, there's a large number of deaths have been reported to VAERS. Again, we know VAERS is not a causative. You cannot infer causality, but the number of deaths that have been reported for COVID-19 vaccines, I think exceeds all other numbers of deaths for all other vaccines for all other years combined. And again, just to preface your question, the Democrats, particularly on the panel, kept asking the same question more or less to the panel members, which was something like, can you explain, the safety systems, and what safety systems do we have to assess safety of the vaccines? And the answer, which was repeated, oh yes, we have VAERS and we have VSD, we have several systems, and this is the procedure for investigating, and so on and so forth, and trying to build up the fact that we've got all these systems, and isn't it wonderful, and therefore you shouldn't be worrying about it. And then at the same time, particularly in VAERS, the comments were, well, it's anyone can report to VAERS, it's not causative, you can't infer causality, and so on and so forth. So they're on the one hand, they're saying we've got all these great systems that include VAERS. On the other hand, they're saying, well, VAERS isn't that reliable because anyone can report into it. You can't have it both ways. But FDA themselves have said not that there's over-reporting, they've said that there's under-reporting, and they've said that in several places, notably in the hearing, the VRBPAC meeting in I think it was October 2021, when they were analyzing, doing a risk-benefit analysis for the children's vaccines. The FDA person used a different database to do the calculation. The CDC person asked, why are you using that database? Why aren't you using VAERS or something like that? To which the FDA person replied, well, theirs is underreported. So you can't, on the one hand, try and say, well, there's overreporting and so on, when you're on the same time saying there's underreporting. Okay, so that's a huge problem right there. Now we'll get to the more specific details of what Congresswoman Lesko was asking, which was that there have been many reports. She mentioned those two people, but there's been many other reports of patients that have reported or attempted to report things into VAERS and who have not received any kind of communication. There's been communications with NIH. Brianne Dressen, who is the sort of the co-founder of the React-19 vaccine injury group, she and a number of her fellow vaccinees, injured vaccinees, went to NIH to undergo different kinds of testing, and at best limited results have come out of that, and these people are absolutely abandoned by the system, and Congressman Raskin, who was the ranking member of the main committee that this is a subcommittee of, was in attendance at this hearing, and he said something very appropriate. He said, look, I understand that no drug is safe, no vaccine is safe, completely 100% safe. There's going to be some kinds of injuries, okay, and we have to manage this trade-off between whatever the public benefits may or may not be from using the vaccine, to the fact that there are people that may get injured somehow or other from the vaccine, and we have to have a proper system in place to deal with that. And these people who took the vaccines, many times they volunteered for clinical trials. They stood in line to be first in line to do their part to help alleviate the pandemic based on the premises that these vaccines were going to be safe and effective, and so on and so forth. Okay, these people have been hugely abandoned, and that was behind Representative Lesko's question, and that really was not addressed. Dr. Marks, I know you have the clip. It was like the tail end of the clip you showed him earlier. He said, well, I want to apologize to all the parents of children under 5 who died, because of COVID or whatever. Okay, and it was a pretty emotional response that he gave. Okay, and of course it's a tragedy that anyone dies. We understand that. No one's debating that. But we were also talking about vaccine safety. That was the purpose of this meeting. Yeah. And what has happened is that the people who have reported potentially vaccine safety issues, whether or not it turns out to be that way, we don't know. But at least they've even reported that they might have been injured from the use of one of these vaccines. These people have been completely sidelined. They have been completely marginalized and trivialized, and doctors don't want to touch them. Okay, they've been discriminated against in that way, and the least that anyone can do, whether it's Dr. Marks or anyone else on the committee, is or testifying, can recognize that. Say, listen, we have people that have had actual injuries, or they may have had injuries. Okay, they need to come out and communicate very, very clearly and say, we don't know what really happened. We're going to do our best to find out what really happened. Okay, but what absolutely is not tolerable whatsoever is that someone presents with some medical condition that could be due to whatever. Okay, that person has the fundamental right to be treated as an equal with like any other disease, and the fact that it may or may not have been attributed to this vaccine or that vaccine should be entirely irrelevant. And again, to speak to trust in public health institutions, they can increase their trust number, tremendously, if only they would come out and say listen, we are going to do our best to make sure everyone gets treated fairly, regardless of what the cause is or may be or might be. That is a huge problem, and I think that was the fundamental thing behind Representative Lesko's question.
Yeah, so continuing with VAERS, let's talk about the volume of reports that were coming in at the outset of the vaccine rollout. And the chairman, Rep. Brad Wenstrup, asked about VAERS reporting. I'm going to play a clip here of that exchange.
As of February 2024, VAERS reports for COVID-19 vaccines total significantly higher than all other vaccines combined since 1990, as reported. This is a surprising figure. Dr. Marks, was the government prepared for such an avalanche of reports to VAERS? And it kind of goes with what we just mentioned. So.
Chair Wenstrup, thank you so much for that question, and I apologize about your name before. It shows when you're nervous, things can happen. But the point is extremely well taken. We tried to be prepared for that, but the avalanche of reports was tremendous, and it again required retasking people on the fly I think and I'll let my CDC colleagues speak to this. We had to hugely staff up and had many meetings working to increase our ability to go through these reports.
Somewhat stunning there, just to hear the amount of them admit the avalanche of reports coming in.
Right. So again, there's this dichotomy between saying, well, VAERS, anyone can report into VAERS. Therefore, it's not reliable. Versus, we're really going to look into this. Now, this was a pandemic. Did the FDA have hundreds of people on staff ready for whatever number of reports? No, they didn't. And I'm not sure that you can say that's a fault of theirs. Okay, and there were many things that happened on the fly. So I don't have a personal problem with that as such, but I think the fun, and we know there was a backlog. Jessica Rose, who's done a lot of work on VAERS, I remember speaking to sort of mid 2021, and she was analyzing and showing what there was a huge backlog. The bigger backlog now is in processing them, and there have been a number of reports. Again, someone really needs to look at this in a really systematic way, and maybe this is something for the committee to look into as part of their what they're trying to accomplish is actually to really commission a detailed report as to the reporting and the responsiveness, and did everyone who wanted to report into VAERS actually were able to. There's been many reports of doctors trying to report into VAERS and the system crashed, or they didn't get an acknowledgement, or people were saying I reported into VAERS, it doesn't show up in the public system for months and months and months. There's all kinds of things, and that really needs to be looked at really carefully with a detailed report. This is not something that you can resolve in a 1 or 2 hour hearing, but someone needs to commission a very detailed scientific study of all of those types of issues, and then once you even get to that point, how accurate, checking the accuracy of the reports, and then what happens to them afterwards. How do the reports get analyzed and the signals be generated and determined statistically? So there's a huge range of things that need to be done for VAERS particularly, but also some of the other systems.
Yeah, the final clip I want to play is, I thought, a rather extraordinary exchange between Rep. James Comer from Kentucky, and he had a question for Dr. Marks about this potential speeding up of the approval process by and removing hesitant doctors from the process potentially, and why do we potentially speed up the approval on the rollout of the vaccine. So let me play that clip for you.
You, Dr. Marks, then said you wanted it approved even faster than September 15th, but they declined. According to them, after they declined, you and former FDA Commissioner Janet Woodcock relieved them from the roles in the approval process. They said that they felt, quote, substantial pressure, unquote, from you to approve this vaccine faster than they thought was defensible. My question is, did anyone instruct you to speed up the approval timeline faster than September 15th, 2021?
Chair Comer, thank you for that question. I think it deserves an explanation, but what was going on during that summer that changed the situation was in the week ending July 10th of 2021, there were 1,645 deaths. In the week ending August 14th, there were 9,406 deaths. There were an increasing number of deaths from COVID-19, and there was clear knowledge that having an approved vaccine would help Americans feel more comfortable getting vaccinated. So we felt speeding up the vaccine approval process.
So let me interrupt. Did anyone instruct you, or is this just a decision you made on your own?
This was a decision that I had made on my own.
So he's asked about speeding this up, and he gives the, raw numbers from that time period.
Right. So, there's a couple of aspects here. I think related to Chairman Comer there, he also mentioned as part of that question the resignations of Doctors Gruber and Krauss, who were senior, very, very senior vaccine, scientists at FDA with a distinguished career going back many, many years, and they had resigned. I think their resignation took place effective about a month or so later. But there was already some controversy going on, particularly when the booster shots were discussed on September the 17th. So we're talking a very compressed time period. And I don't recall the exact curve, but I think the curve was certainly going up around that time. And if it was Dr. Marks's sole decision, or did he have a group of people deciding? I mean, someone's got to be in charge, and sometimes the decision is not the correct one in hindsight, and we can all be, Monday morning quarterbacks. I'm not anxious to sort of do that kind of analysis, but at the time, there were plenty of people who were talking about what was really going on, including Doctors Krauss and Gruber and many others. And so let's just look at the timeline of that. So the Comirnaty was given the full BLA approval, I think it was August the 21st or 23rd of 2021. And Dr. Marks referred there to something that the CDC later on, about a week later, acknowledged explicitly with slides and their presentation at the CDC meeting, which was that they felt the vaccine hesitancy was a huge issue. They wanted to get more people vaccinated, and they did various types of market research kinds of questions, surveys, and remember, nothing had full approval at this point. There was only the emergency use authorizations for the Comirnaty, the Pfizer product, the Moderna product, and the J&J product. And the question was put to the people in the survey, well, what would make you, take a vaccine if you haven't taken one already? I mean, I'm not sure the exact question, but it's something along those lines. And the answer was something like, well, there haven't been any full approval, so why should we believe any of this stuff? It's all been this emergency use stuff. So what if we gave a full approval to something? What would happen? I said, so 30-something% of the people who were vaccine hesitant at that point said, well, if you approve fully one vaccine, then we will go ahead and take a vaccine, even one that wasn't a fully approved. But as long as you've shown that you've done something to fully approve something, we will take something. So that's what Dr. Marks was referring to there. Okay. Now, what that full approval was, that's a whole nother problem, because that Comirnaty that was fully approved was never, to my knowledge, actually available. The only thing that was available was the emergency use version. And there was some, interesting wording about how they managed all that, which we don't need to go into. But the debate that was going on with Doctors Krauss and Gruber, as far as I understand it, was really twofold. One was that there was some, I'll say, political pressure, either from the White House or from the CDC or whoever it was, to get some kind of full approval, and they felt that this was getting accelerated too fast for the correct quality of approval that they should have been, undertaking. That was one aspect, and the second aspect was, well, are these vaccines really working? And that's a critical point that people separate out here, but you should really look at it in conjunction. Because a week later at the CDC, or a few days later at the CDC meeting that sort of ratified the FDA decision, there was a presentation of the data, and some of the data apparently hadn't been presented, that was suggesting already that there was waning immunity, right, to the vaccines. So that wasn't presented as far as I could. I think I recall writing a letter to the CDC, and I think it might have even gone on Trial Site News, that some of those data that was suggesting there was waning immunity, okay, was already in existence when the FDA made their full approval and when the CDC were asked to give their recommendation about the approval. So that was at the end of August. Now, very shortly on the heels of that, on September the 17th, I think it was the booster authorization. So we've only had the full authorization 2 weeks or so earlier, and now you're saying there's going to be boosters. Why? Because now there's waning. You didn't know about waning 2 weeks ago, right? And Dr. Krauss, in fact, I think his position was that he didn't think they needed a booster, and he made a presentation. But to me, the key presentation at that booster meeting, which FDA should have known these data, or at least have a preliminary version of it 2 weeks earlier, was the data from Israel, who had started to boost people several weeks earlier. So they had some preliminary data. And the graph that was shown that FDA sort of relied on somewhat purported to show some benefit of boosting. But there was something very weird about the graph. I don't have it on, quickly, I can pull up on a slide, but in one of our submissions to the CDC, I'm sure we put it there, is that when we went back into the Israeli data and split out that graph and analyzed it in a certain way, what we found was that the line on the graph that was purporting to show a benefit from boosting was actually a composite of two things. It showed boosting, which there was apparently some benefit, but the more important thing in that data set was the fact that by 6 months after receiving the vaccine was basically useless. Okay, and that surely was known by the FDA. It was surely known by the FDA at the boosting decision, and they probably had a very good inkling of that when they approved the Comirnaty 2 or so weeks before. So that is a huge aspect that people don't understand, and we need to understand the basis for these decisions. If Dr. Marks is making the decision on his own or with a group of people, okay, people can make the wrong decisions with the best will in the world, and I'm certainly not challenging that. And I think that's important to note, that I think for the most part people made decisions, with goodwill, hopefully, and sort of motives should not be, imputed. But sometimes the decision wasn't, could it have been a better decision, and how could it have been a better decision? What processes should have been in place to try and improve the quality of decisions in the future without trying to, it's obviously people working very hard at FDA. I know that. I know I've had emails from people late at night and CDC late at night. So people are working hard. There's no question about that. But still, we've got to see, examine the processes of how decisions are made. And clearly, even at the time, it wasn't a great decision. And certainly in hindsight, it wasn't a great decision. And sometimes that's how it is, but try and avoid the emotional aspect that goes into that.
So my final question for you then is just your overall thoughts on the hearing, the summary, your summary of this hearing that went on for, I believe, around 2.5 hours.
Right, right.
Next week. Just your overall general thoughts on it as you monitored it.
Well, I mean, I think I'm encouraged by the tone of Dr. Wenstrup. I think he's trying to, inject a cool, calm, collected air into this, and hopefully that will proceed. Hopefully that will lead to more sort of detailed investigation. I felt that, and I'm not a political person. I'm a Republican or a Democrat or whatever. I don't have any, skin in the game one way or the other in that sense. But I felt that the questions, from the Republican side for the most part were very directed, and the one that you showed from Mr. Cloud about the transmission and that type of thing. But for the most part, on the other side, that wasn't the case. I think Mr. Raskin's comments were well placed. But the efforts on the Democrat side were really sort of to try and paint a picture that everything's completely rosy, and this is just a sort of an attack on on vaccines in general, or any comments that anyone would say is a sort of anti-vax kind of comment, and really that's not what was happening. So there's a complete divide between the approach of the members on the Republican side versus, for the most part, and the people for the most part on the other side. So, I hope that Dr. Wenstrup is able to prevail, and even Dr. Ruiz, who is the ranking member. He's a medical doctor. Both of whom have given COVID vaccines to their constituents. There was a point where Dr. Ruiz was trying to sort of, I don't know what the right word would be, explain, perhaps, is that the right word? Spin, I don't know if that's the right word. The comment, the transmission question, and say, well, if you reduce the viral load, don't you agree, Dr. Marks, that helps to reduce transmission and so on? And I don't have the exact quote, but I mean, even Dr. Marks, under that sort of direct question, he said, well, your comment is sort of generally appropriate, but only in very general terms, but the specifics of it is not really what you're trying to say. Again, please look at the exact quote to what he said, but Dr. Reeves was sort of in contortions trying to sort of take back that trend that the vaccines don't reduce transmission comment, and he was going out of his way in a very unnatural way, frankly. And so I hope that we can review that kind of response and just get to the bottom. There's people that have been hurt here. We haven't talked about the Dr. Grimes, the Commander Grimes, who is in charge of the compensation programs and the understaffing and the complete inadequacies of those programs. I mean, that's a whole topic on its own, but that's a huge topic that we need to really address, and I hope that Dr. Wenstrup is able to explore that aspect as well. So lots to discuss in the future. Cancers, safety signals. We haven't talked about safety signals that they've completely ignored. We talked about the cancer ones, but there are others that have popped up at the ACIP meeting in September. The person sort of leading the vaccine safety data link project, Dr. Klein, who works for Kaiser Permanente, she sort of slipped in her presentation that there actually had been a signal in I think it was May of 2022 for acute myocardial infarction and venous thromboembolism, and I saw the slide. I said, I've seen these types of slides before. I've never seen that slide before, showing signals for myocardial infarction and thromboembolism. So I went back into all the CDC meetings, the FDA meetings, and sure enough, I found similar slides, but not one showing those signals in the period in any period, especially in the May 2022 period. So how come that signal, she's only talking about it now when it was evident to someone, but not talked about over a year, nearly 18 months earlier? So the focus, one of the foci of the meeting was the loss of public trust which is leading to lower vaccination rates of other types of vaccines. And unless FDA and CDC, grapple with these things and start engaging with the people who need to be engaged with, and not, this is hiding. I mean, when you hide a signal in May 2022 and only talk about it, in a September 2022 meeting and say, well, maybe we should look at these. Yeah, they should look at these. I and others, we found signals for these things in end of 2021. Why is it taken this long for CDC to talk about it? So there are signals that are there that they have not acted upon, and they're trying to say, well, we've done a great job with stroke. It was a transient signal. No, even with stroke, there's been other reports that have come out from FDA, CDC that are not confirming their sort of downplaying of the stroke signal. So where is all that? Where are these signals? Why aren't we hearing about them? Why are they downplaying them? These are really, really concerning things. And again, the mantra that this is reducing, this is reducing COVID disease. Again, we need to hear analysis from FDA and CDC of data such as the ones that have come out of the Cleveland Clinic. Okay, a very credible, institution. There's 2 papers by Shrestha in last year, I believe, and the one from the 2023 paper that was posted on medRxiv, a preprint. I'll just quote you what they say here. Adults, quote, not up to date, which is the CDC's terminology. Adults not up to date by the CDC definition have a lower risk of COVID than those who are up to date. Okay, so CDC's own data is showing that at a certain point, the vaccine efficacy becomes negative. You have a higher risk for COVID. You have this Shrestha data. There's other data as well. We cannot keep going along the mantra saying this is 95% efficacy and end it there, because clearly that's not happening. All of these issues have to be grappled with really, really carefully. And the last one I want to just end with is that this terminology, safe and effective, and people do not understand what that means. It's a technical term that's used in the regulations and the law, and safe and effective refers to a regulatory standard that the FDA have determined something to be safe and effective. Of course, we understand that doesn't mean 100% safe, and it doesn't mean 100% effective. We understand that, but it requires a certain quality of evidence called substantial evidence, consisting of well-controlled, clinical studies, that type of thing. That's the safe and effective standard. The EUA standard is not it's not the safe and effective standard. It's a standard where the FDA has to reasonably believe that the product may be effective. That's a very, very different standard from safe and effective. And it's a lower level of evidence, and FDA has acknowledged that. Okay, so to say everything is safe and effective is not accurate. Even today, we have the children's vaccines under 12 who are still EUA vaccines, not full approved vaccines. So they certainly have this standard of may be effective. And the level of evidence is based on something called a totality of evidence, totality of scientific evidence, which can consist of all sorts of evidence, not necessarily from randomized clinical trials. If those don't exist, FDA can rely on other types of studies, even animal studies and so on, in order to make regulatory decisions. So again, for public trust, okay, they have to be really clear about what standards have been applied. And they keep saying, well, this is past all the rigorous safety standards and that type of thing. Okay, safety evaluations. No, that's not true. The UA level, and Dr. Marks used a term something like, he said something that it's nearly like the full approval, or almost like he used some kind of term like that. No, it's not nearly like, okay? It is a much lower level of evidence, okay? And again, it's not good or bad, it's what it is, but you have to be clear as to what that is. And that's something the public doesn't realize. And frankly, I don't think, people on the committee realize, because this is a highly technical thing, and they need to understand that. So I hope all of these things can be clarified and dealt with in the future.
Dr. David Wiseman, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And for unbiased news and opinion articles on the latest in scientific research, please visit trialsitenews.com.